70% of Republicans in Arizona think the election was stolen and fraudulent.
Right.
I feel like
you understand that's crazy.
What I've done
said you're still investigating.
We've run a lot of the stuff to ground.
And when you get it to ground, will you come out and say Donald J. Trump is wrong? The election in Arizona was fair, not stolen, and not fraudulent.
I've always been a straight shooter, and once all the facts and evidence are John, come on, man.
So why can't you say the election in 2020 was not stolen or fraudulent?
I will tell you this, as I said.
This is blowing my mind.
It's blowing my mind too, but it turns out now with new developments, there was always a reason he couldn't say that it hadn't been stolen, and that was that he was absolutely terrified of Donald Trump. He's terrified of the Republican base. Here's not the reason that he couldn't say it, that he didn't know that it wasn't stolen, because it turns out he had already at that point, that was 2022, he'd already known for 2 years definitively that it hadn't been stolen. And this is coming thanks to Democratic Attorney General Kris Mayes, who took office last month and can now unveil the records from when that chucklehead was the Attorney General. Because apparently in March 2022, there was a summary of the investigative findings of Arizona, and he didn't put it out because it showed that there hadn't been fraud, that the fraud claims being spread by Trump and his allies wasn't true. He just sat on it. A month later, he released an interim report. It wasn't interim. They were already done. He just didn't want it to be released. That claimed his investigation, quote, revealed serious vulnerabilities that must be addressed and raises questions about the 2020 election in Arizona. That wasn't true. The report was done and showed that that wasn't true. His interim report actually received pushback from his own investigators, who said that some of its claims were already refuted by the inquiry that they had completed at that point. And so this is why we're worried about people like this, massive lying grifters getting into positions of power, because they will just knowingly lie about the results to manipulate the outcome.
Jon is really such an exceptional person that he really could be president tomorrow, and he's smart enough to not want the job. Seriously, but he is a leader. In 2019, he testified before Congress about our government's shameful lack of health care for the men and women who responded to the events of September 11th. Yeah, people like my dad who ran into the towers that day, but instead of giving their lives in a moment, they walked away with a lifetime of illness and pain. And Jon sat there with those responders behind him and Congress before him and gave the least funny speech he's ever made.
They did their jobs with courage, grace, tenacity, humility. 18 years later, do yours.
So that was, of course, Pete Davidson speaking about Jon Stewart at the when he was getting his Mark Twain Prize. Many other comedians not only lauded Jon Stewart, but also talked about the possibility of him being president, and thus the op-eds were born. There's an op-ed on Politico from Juliana Glover. If Tucker runs in 2024, here's who the Democrats need. And if you're on the podcast, you're not seeing. It is a picture of Jon Stewart beseeching God. I'm not sure what that photo is, but it's gotten serious. The op-ed starts off. Perhaps the most important reason for the Democrats to consider Stewart is who he'd be running against. Trump may run. Stewart has far more TV experience and is plainly much smarter with more agility before crowds. Trump's go-to show of strength has been his ability to pull thousands for his political rallies because they are viewed as entertainment by his supporters. A Stewart rally would be a road show of the most hilarious and civic-minded entertainers known today. Also says Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former Vice President Mike Pence seem like they are running. Stewart would just wood chip right through those two stiff as a board speakers. And also goes on to say, what it would mean if Tucker Carlson were to run. And everybody knows their history with Jon Stewart bodying Tucker Carlson like 15 years ago or whatever. Now I'm gonna jump ahead briefly for time. Jon Stewart tweeted just like 2 days ago, no thank you. And that's the entire tweet. It doesn't say what he's responding to, but it's easy to imagine that it's the discussion of him potentially running for president, Francesca. What do you make of this?
Well, I was like, can we get lunch on Wednesday? So, and then I saw that tweet and he said, no, thank you. I was like, okay, God. but I
really
definitely have
wanna go.
alerts on his tweets, so I know every time he tweets. I would love for Jon Stewart to run for president. I'm sorry. We need someone who is a no BSer, and I'm so tired. And this is why, like, people like Bernie Sanders have been popular, is because when they speak, it's very difficult to detect their BS, and most politicians have a ton of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of been Jon Stewart's like clarion call, like that's his motto, is no BS, really. When he signed off from the Daily Show, that's effectively what he said. He was like, smell it out wherever it is. And I do think it is very admirable. I know that he and his wife do awesome work in terms of like rescuing factory farm animals. And he's done this work when it comes to 9/11 first responders. And so he has a history of advocacy, and I do think that that can be very effective. It's mostly just me feeling selfish and wanting him to destroy the Republican Party single-handedly. And he absolutely could. Do I think he could govern well? No, but neither can any Democrat.